Hello and welcome to another Anti-Wellness wank3ry episode with Tom Bainbridge and Ruby. So today we are talking about your metabolism slowing down with dieting and dieting fucking up your metabolism, the truth and the myths behind it. So we know that after a diet, or let's just stick to after a diet. After a diet, you diet your way down, you're used to eating less, having to feel hunger, having quite an empty stomach most of the time, unless you're loading up with volume-filled foods and getting your volume-filled belly bloat from that. But as soon as you hit a certain date or you hit a certain weight and it's time to start eating more, you feel like food just sticks to you. Or you feel like your belly is always bloating, or you're always full, or something's wrong. Or maybe you decide to start a reverse diet, in quotation marks, or just start eating more in general. And then you find that you start gaining weight back, either pretty fast or moderately at a rate you didn't expect. And then you freak out. You wonder if your metabolism is slowing down. You wonder what's going on. You think that all you're gaining is fat. You wonder how much of it's muscle, how much of it is fat. And then there's the other side, which ends up a little bit worse, where you cut out carbs, you cut out a lot of your favorite highly palatable foods, aka delicious foods. And as soon as you start eating those foods back, you start to feel more inflamed, watery, bloaty. Your belly might not be able to digest it because you've cut it out for so long. But not only that, like, there's that element of it. And if you're good enough, in quotation marks, to stick with that and you still feel shit through that, there's that element. But then there's the element of, now what if you start binge eating those things and you start wondering what's happening with my metabolism? This has never happened to me before. Now I'm just gaining more weight than ever. So there are three different elements there. And all of which leads to the fact that people then wonder if they fucked up their metabolism, if their actions screwed up what they thought they'd be able to now build muscle, get lean, and stay lean while building muscle. But instead they just feel like a watery elephant. So we're here to tell the truth about this, and I'm gonna let Tom start it off with his feel on metabolism slowing down and what happens after a diet when we start eating more, because weight gain is inevitable. Your ending weight of a diet and your lean feels after a diet are not meant to remain, which is why the worst thing you can do, actually this is something you can take now, the worst thing you can do is buy clothes for your leanest self, your lightest, leanest end diet phase self that are tight and restrictive. Because then what happens once you start eating more, once you start training harder, once you start eating more carbs and your body isn't so depleted, that ending weight is your depleted weight. Your body is like an empty sponge that's been wrung out. So now I'm gonna hand it over to Tom to take it away.
Sure. I mean, there's obviously degrees in these kinds of things, right? So, Ruby, I know a lot of the people that you work with are they're people who are looking to get in extremely lean shape. So you work with people who are looking to get into photo shoot shape or even competition shape, even if they don't compete. They're people looking for extreme levels of leanness or being very lean. I tend to work with people who are looking for just a lower body fat level, but something that is very sustainable. So in the case of my clients, for example, buying clothes that would fit you at your leanest would make sense, because my clients at my leanest would probably be like your clients at their starting point in a lot of cases. So there's obviously degrees to that. But yeah, it's a really common complaint that people will finish a diet and then be worried that they're going to start regaining weight, or even find that they're going to start regaining weight. And the question of whether or not this is a metabolic damage issue will regularly come up. So I think what's probably a useful place to start is to explain what the deal is with metabolic adaptation, what happens to your metabolism as you diet, because then at least we've got a starting point where we can all be on the same page, and then we can work out what's actually happening at this end point of the diet when regain starts to happen. So there are a number of different ways that this idea of metabolic adaptation is spoken about, which is probably one of the primary causes of concern, because what ends up happening is that people will talk past each other. So you'll get people online who will say every time you diet, that causes adaptation to your metabolism. So there are people in the anti-diet movement, for example, or even people in like the ketogenic diet movement, who will say that calorie restriction causes your metabolism to adapt. If you eat fewer calories, your body just adapts to fewer calories, and for that reason, calorie restriction doesn't work. I've seen this sentiment loads and loads of times. And the assertion that follows on from that ranges from, therefore nobody should diet, and if you have obesity, you're just supposed to have obesity and dieting is bad, all the way to, therefore calorie restriction shouldn't work, so you should do my magic dieting protocol, and that'll help you lose fat without calorie restriction. Hopefully everyone listening to the podcast kind of understands that dieting does work. It happens regularly, and keto doesn't cause magic fat loss. It just causes you to restrict calories. Anyway, so people will use that thing. But then there are other people who might not necessarily make the same assertions, but who do think very similar things. So I've seen lots of coaches say, for example, you shouldn't on really low calories, because if you diet on really low calories, your body gets used to that and then you've got nowhere to go. That's a very common statement. And the underlying sentiment that's being communicated there is, if you diet on 1,500 calories, at some point 1,500 calories will become your maintenance, and then you'll have to diet even further, or pick your own number if 1,500 calories would be appropriate to you, whatever. And I've also seen people say if you yo-yo diet, you can damage your metabolism and that makes fat loss harder, blah, blah, blah. Right. None of these are precise enough. So in the scientific literature, what people talk about rather than like metabolic adaptation or whatever is something called adaptive thermogenesis. So thermogenesis is your body producing energy, basically, and adaptive thermogenesis is, of course, adaptation to that. And here's how it's typically defined. Okay, on a day-to-day basis, your body requires a given number of calories at rest. It's your basal metabolic rate. And the reason your body requires a given number of calories on a day-to-day basis is because all of your tissue is alive to an extent. So skin tissue, as everybody knows, is being regenerated all the time. So you're making new skin cells. Your skin cells are dividing and creating new ones. And then you've got other cells that are metabolizing nutrients so you can do things. And then you've got muscles which are constantly turning over, and you've got bone that is turning over. And all of this requires energy. And so at a baseline level, each tissue in your body needs a certain amount of energy just to exist, because it's not like a dead thing like this table. Like this table requires no energy because it's not turning anything over. It's active tissue. And depending on the tissue, of course, there's like a different amount of energy that's required. So the most energy expensive tissue in your entire body, pound for pound, is your brain. Your brain goes through shitloads of energy for its size. And then you can compare that, for example, to fat tissue, which is alive, but it doesn't require a lot of energy day to day to turn over. It can just kind of be there for the most part. Now, you can kind of, if you were so inclined, you could take a person apart piece by piece, and you could weigh how heavy their kidneys are and how heavy their brain is. They would probably disagree to you doing this, but you could do it. And you could use the weight of each one of these tissues to estimate how much energy that person would require on a day-to-day basis. And if you had very, very precise measurements, you could basically tell someone, this is how many calories you need because you have this many grams of brain, this many grams of teeth, this many grams of bone, this many grams of whatever. Adaptive thermogenesis is when a reasonable calculation of that energy requirement turns out to be incorrect by a given percentage. So adaptive thermogenesis is not, at the end of a diet, you'll require fewer calories than you did at the start. Because of course you will. You're a smaller person. If you carried around a 30-kilo backpack day to day, your energy expenditure would go up. And then if you took that 30-kilo backpack off, your energy expenditure would go down. And that's got nothing to do with adaptive thermogenesis. You're just carrying less shit. That's not adaptation. It's also not adaptation when a person diets and they feel less energetic, you've got a little bit less, you've got fewer beans to put towards exercise, you're not as fidgety, so you move around less. That's not adaptive thermogenesis, that's just you moving around less and burning less energy. True adaptive thermogenesis is when the energy expenditure that would be expected for the given amount of tissue that you have is not lining up with the amount of energy that you actually expend on a day-to-day basis. And the top line, because I don't want to get too bogged down in, because there's loads of research on this, I don't want to get too bogged down into it. There are a few studies that have pinned down exactly how much of this adaptive thermogenesis you can actually find. And there are 3 ones that I think are really worth bringing up. So the first one is like the seminal piece of work on this, which was the Minnesota starvation trial done in 1940s. Basically what this was is there was a bunch of conscientious objectors to World War II who, rather than being conscripted into the army, entered into a scientific experiment to mimic being in a prisoner of war camp. So these individuals were placed in, I think it was a 50% calorie deficit, and they were made to work. So they had to like dig holes and move rocks around and shit. And researchers just measured them to see what would happen and how their body would adapt and how they could be rehabilitated. And although this was done in the 40s, the work was extremely well done, and this is still considered to be pretty much like the gold standard for randomized control trials. Like they nailed this. And top line, what was found is that by the end of the experiment, the individuals were expending 15% fewer calories than would be expected for their weight and activity levels. Now, the next piece of work that's really important on this is research done on participants in The Biggest Loser. So The Biggest Loser is a TV show where you take a bunch of people with obesity and then bully them and starve them for a bunch of weeks for the entertainment of the public. It's a disgusting TV show that should be taken off air, but there you go. Now, under those conditions, it was found that the participants at the end of The Biggest Loser had an energy expenditure that was about 18% lower than it would be expected to be at baseline. So remember, this is not including their activity levels. This is just their resting metabolic rate was about 18% lower than it would be expected to be. Now, the final experiment that's worth considering is, I believe it was called the calorie trial, but I might be misremembering this one. Calorie spelt CALERIE. I think this is the study I was talking about, or it might be a different name, but it doesn't matter. This was an experiment that was trying to see if human beings can live in a sealed ecosystem that would like mimic if we were to go and live on Mars or whatever. So basically they took a bunch of men and women, and it's important because the other 2 studies primarily were men and women. And they lived essentially in like a sealed ecosystem. So they were in like this big ass dome where they grew their own food and all of that. And they ended up not getting enough calories, obviously. Now, at the end of that experiment, because they lost a bunch of weight, it was found that their energy expenditure was about 5 to 7% lower than it would be expected to be at baseline. Now, there's a couple of things that are really important to pull out here before I let Ruby go on, because I've just monologued for like 10 minutes. In both the Minnesota starvation experiment and the Biggest Loser trial, those figures were measured, so the 15 and the 18%, those figures were measured while the people were still dieting. And that's almost certainly a relevant factor, because adaptive thermogenesis, if you think about it as a survival mechanism, which it probably is, will happen through, there's a bunch of different mechanisms. So your body produces less heat. So whenever you produce energy, there's not really such a thing as a perfect system. So, for example, if you've got a light bulb in your house, the idea of that light bulb is to produce light energy, but it also produces heat energy. If you touch a light bulb when it's on, it's warm, and that warmth is that's not supposed to be there. That's waste coming out of the system that was supposed to be going into the light. Now, your body does a similar thing. So when your body produces locomotion, for example, or when your body produces whatever it does, some of that energy that your body produces is lost as heat, and this is how, as warm-blooded creatures, we're allowed to like maintain a core body temperature. Your body can get more efficient at producing energy. So in adaptive thermogenesis, one of the mechanisms through which this happens is your body just produces less heat. So you are colder, and because you're colder, you're producing less energy, and so you require fewer calories. So that's one of the big ones. There's also some other things like, so the mitochondria, which is the thing in your cell that produces energy, they get more efficient, they waste less oxygen and so on. And there's a couple other things like Ruby, just quickly, have you ever prepped anyone for competition?
Yeah, plus myself.
Or have you? So when you prep for competition, did you notice that your face changed? Like the muscles in your face were like a bit saggy.
Your face is usually the first one to go away, but also even just your blinking slows down. Everything slows down. Even like something else that I figured out through comp prep is that your body extracts more calories from food as well. Like it does everything it possibly can to get every single calorie from food. So even like low calorie foods like artificial sweeteners and all that kind of crap, your body will take a lot more calories from those artificial sweeteners and also from fiber. And part of the mitochondria thing that you were mentioning there as well, with your mitochondria becoming more efficient as you diet, is that part of you extract more calories from food, but also with every movement, with your training, you burn less calories through that because your body wants to become a lot more efficient at everything it does. So it will find faster pathways to do so. Now, there was a part in there. Actually, I'll touch on that part in a second. I'll just
finish that thought if that's right. So that efficiency happens as well. And so all of that would happen while you're dieting. There's no reason to assume that your body would continue to do that to the same degree when you're not dieting anymore. So those 15 and 18% figures are like the big headline figures, but in broadly the rest of the research, and I'm not going to name all of the trials, but the calorie trial and all of the other trials, when the participants are measured after the dieting phase, in some trials it's found that there's no adaptation anymore at all. And in some trials, it's found that there is some adaptation still. So in the Biggest Loser trial, for instance, there was still metabolic adaptation a year down the line, even when people weren't dieting anymore. But it was way lower than 18%. So the top-down figure, like what is metabolic adaptation? To finish that off, metabolic adaptation is the phenomenon that's seen in most research that involves fat loss, where during a diet, especially as you get very, very lean, your body becomes more efficient. So you burn fewer calories on a day-to-day basis. The highest amount of adaptation that's ever been discovered was 18%. And that 18% was discovered in horrendous dieting practices that involved massively excessive amounts of cardio and crash dieting in people with obesity. And the 18% figure was measured during the diet. Now remember, that's 18% of basal metabolic rate. Most people's basal metabolic rate is going to be it's going to be less than 2,000 calories. Almost always. So an 18% drop on 2,000 calories is going to be 400 calories. So this is not like your body is burning 1,000 calories a day. It means that if you had a 2,000 calorie basal metabolic rate, which you would have if you were like 95 kilos or something, that's a big basal metabolic rate, you'd burn 1,600 calories at rest instead of 2,000, and then you've got all of your exercise calories on top of that. So you could still feasibly be burning 3,000 calories a day, and that's measured during the diet. So when you're not dieting anymore, that figure seems to reduce. In some people, it reduces to zero. In some people, it doesn't. And so the top down is metabolic adaptation happens when you diet. There's not a lot you can do about it. It just happens in some people and it doesn't happen in other people. In research on bariatric operation patients, it happens. On research on bariatric patients, it doesn't happen. People who diet well, it happens. People who diet well, it doesn't happen. It seems to be a bit of a crapshoot, and it's not really understood what leads to adaptation and what doesn't. So people who say go into a small calorie deficit to avoid adaptation are guessing. Similarly, when you finish the diet, it usually goes away, at least to a significant degree. And so the top down is metabolic adaptation does happen, but it will not prevent fat loss. It will not lead to weight gain. It might just slightly reduce your calorie expenditure. and that might need some consideration, but it's not going to prevent you from achieving your goals. And so if you are gaining weight that you don't want to gain, or if you're not losing weight that you want to lose, the problem is not the adaptation, it's something else.
I just really want to interject something you said before about all
Go for it. Go
exercise
for it.
calories
I'll
on top of it.
hours now, so go for it.
I wrote down quite a few just so I can take my own monologue next and provide some context and some added stuff that you did not touch on. But I do have to say, when Tom mentioned the exercise calories on top, he did not mean your exercise calories, because you burn so very little when you exercise, like so very little.
No, you're right. He meant activity calories. Sorry.
Activity calories is what he was talking about. I just needed to clarify that, because you're not going to out exercise any of this. As one big factor in everything that Tom said is that if you diet the wrong way, that is when issues happen, but also because of the hormonal bullshit that you conquer up, and also the fact that you lost muscle mass, which is
like, not really. That can happen, but not for metabolic adaptation reasons. Like, if you diet in the wrong way, things can go to shit, but not because you adapt more. It's because of all of the other stuff.
Yeah, that's what I'm about to bring up in a second. Yeah. That's what I'm about to bring up in a second. So one thing that Tom mentioned at the very start, which is you'll be maintaining your body on 1,400 calories if that's the end of your diet, 1,500 calories if that's the end of your diet. Yeah, that's your new maintenance, but that's the thing. It's a suppressed maintenance. It's not your real maintenance. The reason that is your maintenance there is because of all the adaptations that previously happened. And this is where people kind of get held up and all kinds of fears, because they're like, well, I maintain my body weight on this. I'm not losing anything. I'm not gaining anything. Yeah, but as soon as you start feeding your body up, your body is going to upregulate. Your hormones are going to upregulate. One of the main factors of metabolic adaptation is leptin. Leptin is the hormone that starts, well, as soon as you diet, leptin will drop by about 10% within that, and your basal metabolic rate will drop about 10% with that. But the thing is, the reason that your metabolic rate drops when you diet is for those very things, but there's also a drop in the food that you're eating. So the calories you burn while you eat goes down. You're probably not going to be training as hard or as intensely if that's also the case. That will drop down. If you move less, you're going to be blinking less. Like, NEAT is not something you can control. I hate saying steps are NEAT, because NEAT is more like blinking, fidgeting, things that you cannot control. And you can't just become a fidgeter overnight. Like, you can't just make yourself fidget. That's like in your genes. You're either a fidgeter or you're not a fidgeter. It's like, try to fidget more today. Like
I've got 3 cans of Monster in the fridge that disagree.
Yeah, but it's just like the effect that fidgeting will actually add to the whole equation is very minimal. If you just get more steps, you'll get more out of that. But another reason that metabolic rate drops is because you're losing weight. There is less of you moving around. And if you lose muscle mass, then you're going to have less metabolically adaptive tissue. But then, because of the unsustainable practices, which is what Tom was just alluding to then, you are more likely to gain fat back over muscle. Fat is a third of the metabolic burn of muscle. Muscle is 3 times more metabolically active than fat. So if you're losing muscle and then replacing that with fat, which if you add more fat cells to your body, you cannot delete them. You can't control or delete that shit. You can shrink them, but you can't delete them. So you are increasing your body fat set point. And that's usually where this whole thing comes in, because people take unsustainable practices, then gain more fat back. And this is where yo-yoing, quote unquote, fucks up your metabolism. Because if you keep adding back new fat cells, that, like, any fat cells that you add increases your hunger drive, your drive to eat, because that's what it does. But here's another thing to keep in mind. I already mentioned how a deficit can affect your metabolic rate, but there's also at the same point, your sex hormones get impacted. Your thyroid gets impacted. Your hunger levels, your, like, lettuce with stevia tastes like the most delicious snack in the world when you're dieting. Freaking celery tastes like it's crack cocaine. when you're dieting. Like everything just becomes tastier when you are in a depleted state, meaning you're going to have heightened smell, like you just have an increased drive to eat. So all of these adaptations are why taking diet breaks and spending more time away from fat loss and not rushing it is the key, because this is where people that is where people get stuck and why they feel like everything sticks to them and the metabolism gets fucked up, because once they reach the end of the diet, they don't realize that you're actually meant to eat more, or you're not meant to live in a diet forever and you're meant to take breaks away from it. Now, muscles role in this, like I just said, can influence your set point. And that's where that whole thing comes. Now, there's also the topic of metabolic phenotypes, where if you are someone who can, I guess, you lose weight really quickly because you don't adapt as hard, there's that, I think that's a thrifty metabolism, because you can pretty much lose weight without that much effort, quote unquote. But then there are those that adapt really damn hard, and I'm kind of one of those people, but I also adapt really hard the opposite direction, so I can eat a lot more as well. But when I go into a diet, my performance starts to plummet straight away, and like my body just, like, I need to be able to keep myself moving. But as soon as I'm not dieting anymore, I can thrive and maintain on high calories. But if I need to lose weight, then there is a lot of effort that needs to go into keeping my activity levels high. And that's kind of where people can feel like, okay, well, everything just sticks to me, because by the same token, there are some people that are just more predisposed to gaining weight faster. But at the same time, if you try to diet, you can lose weight just as fast. It's just that you're more predisposed to, because you're one of those spendthrift metabolisms in that, okay, cool, you know what I'm trying to say. So we talked about how crash diets can lead to severe metabolic. You look like you're about to say something.
Yeah, on the spendthrift and wasteful metabolism thing. Have you ever worked with a client who's changed job to like one that's got significantly different conditions?
This is a good one. Yeah, I have two.
Because I don't personally believe that that's a thing. So I'm someone who largely struggles to gain weight. So weight gain's always been really difficult for me. A lot of people hear that and go, oh, it must be terrible to have to eat loads of food. Oh, isn't it a terrible problem? But it is. It's annoying. It's boring. Like, the only people who think it's fun to eat 4,000 calories a day are people who don't eat 4,000 calories a day. It's a shit time. It's fun for about a week, and then it's just boring. But anyway, I train 4 times a week, which is not a lot, but I probably do about 20,000 steps a day. And the reason I do that is because I've got a working Springer Spaniel that I need to take care of. He does a lot of walking every day. And so I struggle to gain weight, yeah, but I'm also really, really active. And whenever I've ever spoken to a client who is like, oh, that's me, like, oh, I only have to look at a cake and it'll put weight on, and I only, like, I try really hard to lose weight and then it only takes one weekend to put it back on. These are people who are not active, and it's not through any fault of their own. These are usually parents. So they'll wake up in the, like, I tend to work with women, so it's usually mums who take like the bulk of the housework and the bulk of the childcare. So it's like they'll get up in the morning, they'll have a coffee, they'll get the kids ready for school, they'll get the kids to school, so they've got no time to do any activity in the morning realistically. Then they'll go to work, they'll drive to work, they'll sit in an office for 8 hours a day, then they'll drive home. They'll pick the kids up from wherever the kids are. They'll bring the kids home. They'll make the kids evening meal. Then they'll go to the gym, and then they'll come back, and then you have to get ready for the next day, and then it's time to go to bed. And it's like, in that day, you might have done 2,000 steps, and you're training 3 times a week because you don't have a lot of time to do anything else. And you can be a little bit active on the weekend, but there's only so much activity you can do in 2 days. And it's like, do you have a slow metabolism, or do you just not move? And then if you combine that with, and this is something that you touched on briefly earlier, Ruby, when you were talking about like for some people, like 1,500 calories is maintenance. Like, if you're a woman, and unfortunately this is something that affects women way more than men, if you're a woman and you're like 5'2" and you're like 130 pounds body weight, like, you are not going to have a lot of calories to play with regardless of what you do. But if you combine that with inactivity, like, your maintenance will be tiny and you just get no wiggle room. So again, for someone like me, like, if I'm not walking the dog as much, I'll maintain my weight on 3,400 calories.
This is exactly why creating a lifestyle out of this and having more movement in your life, this is why you need to take the right approach. Because if you don't create a lifestyle around movement, then everything is going to be so much harder for you, which is why I actually touched on what I touched on. Because the reason, like, I adapt really freaking hard, like I said, on the way down, because there is such a thing, and Brandon DeCruz spoke on it many times in his podcast as well. But the thing is, you can mitigate that by being actively aware of what you're doing, which is what I was going to touch on. Like, the reason why I can, like, my performance drops, yes, but I still make sure I get my steps. I still make sure that I'm on top of all my movement so that I don't have to eat freaking shit calories in order to see results. But then again, I haven't been in a fat loss phase for freaking years. But this is the thing, like, the last time I went on one, my coach didn't even think that I was going to drop that fast. Like, I lost 4 kilos in 1 month, and he did not expect that. He was thinking I'd be like 2 kilos down, but no, my body just lost it like that. And that's because I was outside of a fat loss phase for over 3 years before that diet. And it's been 3 years since I did that. I think that was in like 2020 that I did that one. So that, like, this is the thing. You create the lifestyle, you build up the habits, you create more muscle mass in that as well. And your performance, if you start to lift heavier weights, you can lift more volume. And while it is not like, your goal behind training is not to burn more calories, you do burn more calories by doing that. And then you burn more calories after that because now you have to repair that muscle. But something I really wanted to also touch on within that is the people think that refeeding, as an example, boosts your metabolism while you're in a fat loss phase, but it doesn't really all that much at all. Like, it gives you a psychological break for that one day, but then there are some people where that can trigger a downward spiral because now they crave more highly palatable foods. I actually forgot where I was going to go with that because I got distracted, but I just wanted to interject and say that. Damn it, I had a really good point. Oh, that's what I wanted to say. Sorry. Okay, so when I have a reel on this that I was meant to put out because I did research and all that kind of stuff on females and female studies that have tested this very thing. And once I find the reel, I'm going to put it up because I did a lot of research on that. But they found that the metabolism slowed down by the end of the diet. And then they tested them like a week or two after, and it was still slowed down. But that's the thing, because leptin takes 2 weeks in order for it to then get increased again. And that usually is one of the, it's like the thing that holds the rope to your metabolic rate. But also they lost body weight. And when you lose body weight, your metabolism drops with that because your overall mass has fallen. Then one of the studies, they followed it up. I think it was a year later, 12 months later, and their metabolisms adjusted for their body weight was the exact same again. And that's the thing. It just takes time to then build back up, which is why people usually say you need to eat more food and be out of a diet for the same time that you've been in the diet.
Yeah. But the thing is, though, that's found in some research. But then if you look at The Biggest Loser, their metabolic rate never came back. Like, their metabolic rate stayed suppressed.
A lot of
and
weight.
so from like a practical perspective, I don't even think like, will your metabolism slow down is like a useful question for people to spend a lot of time thinking about, because the answer is maybe. And then the answer to the question, is there anything I can do to avoid that, is no. Don't lose weight would be the answer to that question. And so from a practical perspective, what we need to ask ourselves is not, will my metabolism slow down or anything? It's like, well, what do people who lose weight successfully do? And what do people do who lose weight and successfully keep it off? And the broad answer to the second question is they maintain higher activity levels. And if you can maintain higher activity levels, so not just do loads of cardio to lose weight and then go back to what you were doing, but as Ruby says, like make activity and make exercise part of a lifestyle, even if your metabolic rate adapts a bit, it'll still be high enough for you to get by. And as I say, you need to set realistic expectations. If you are a small person and you're going to get quite light, you will not have the wiggle room someone like me has. I can go to Starbucks and get a caramel latte at 600 calories, and that will not affect my day in the slightest because that is a very small percentage of my total intake. That could feasibly be a third of a moderately active woman's requirement if she's quite small. And so you need to set realistic expectations and try to get your head around the kinds of foods that need to predominate within your diet. But as Ruby said, if you can make daily activity part of your lifestyle outside of exercise, that will increase your daily energy expenditure to the point that any adaptation becomes almost a moot point. And if you're finding that you're gaining weight that you don't want to gain, or you're not losing weight that you want to lose, look away from adaptation as the cause. Look to, do you have lower activity levels than you're expecting? Look to, are you actually gaining weight, or do you just have a distended stomach because you ate a meal and there's food in there now? Are you actually gaining weight, or have you gained a bit of water weight because you're stressed about the fact that you're panicking about gaining weight? Or are you eating in a way that's unsustainable, that's leading you to have additional snacks, or to have like evenings where you eat way more food? Or are you choosing foods that are really calorie dense and you're not accounting for that? Because 100 times out of 100, I was going to say 99 times out of 100, but that's not even true. 100 times out of 100, when I've had a client who's lost weight and then is regaining weight they don't want to regain, and they're worried about metabolic adaptation or whatever, when we dig deep into it, the problem has been that they're not sticking to the dietary approach that they would need to stick to in order to maintain that weight. And that's when we can have that very difficult discussion of, is maintaining this weight worth the sacrifice that's required? And the answer to that's going to, of course, vary client to client.
I think people miss out on the fact that a lot of, like, you want to make this a lifestyle that allows you to still live your life and thrive and not suffer through and have your whole life revolve around what you're eating, what you're training, the exercise you're doing, calorie counting, calorie burning, because what life is that? And just like Tom said in our last episode, which I freaking loved, is, are you going to spend the rest of your life scared to lose all of your progress? Because what life is that, living in fear of losing any progress? Like, that is the point of taking the right approach. You create a lifestyle and an identity around it, and you create the unwavering belief that you have it within your control to do whatever it takes. And I feel like people who stress out about these things and who stress out about the possibility of gaining fat with their muscle or gaining too much or whatever the fuck happens after a diet, they do not fundamentally believe that they can lose the weight again. They do not fundamentally believe that they can control their habits to go back into a diet, because their diet, the time they remember dieting, was so painfully stressful and sacrificing that the thought of trying to diet again just does not appeal to you, or the fact that you're not taking enough time away from fat loss. If you took the right approach and realized that fat loss is such a small portion of this whole equation, and that there is so much to your life and so much to everything than just your body, then it becomes a lot more manageable. And I'm not going to lie, I'm going to say this right now, I'm not going to lie that it hasn't troubled me as one thought in my mind as well. But the thing is, I need to get realistic and fact check my facts, because I do have a history of disordered eating and I do have a history of body image issues. I don't have that now, but I still need to make sure that I'm not going back into that place, because I've come so far already. And all I can think about, but this is the thing, what led to me now, because it wasn't until I lost 3 kilos of muscle, I lost 100 kilos worth of deadlift strength, plus some, whatever the hell. Like, it wasn't until I lost all of that I realized the value in where I was and what I had. You don't realize until it's gone. And it was that moment post-COVID where I realized that all I want to do is be able to just build my muscle already. But it doesn't come without the fear or without the uncomfortability of hey, this is going to come with some discomfort of you getting bigger. The scale's going to go up. Your pants are going to feel tighter. You're going to feel watery. You're going to feel like fat's coming on too, because you do not just gain muscle by itself, and you are not freaking made of wood. Like, muscle itself jiggles when it's relaxed. The only time muscle is hard is when you're flexing it. So I feel like that is a really important part to end this podcast with, because damn it, women, we are so freaking hard on ourselves. The amount of posts I see, clients, everything of people just wanting to look like the next top supermodel on Instagram, which is like, it's not even skin and bones on TV anymore. It's lean, unsustainable body shapes, or someone who's got a BBL, or someone who genetically has a waist the size of my pinky, while their hips are nice and wide, which gives them a big booty illusion. Like, you are not going to change that structure either. We have to, as Tom just mentioned, what is within your control? Because you can damn well become the best version of yourself. You can figure out what parts of them that you like. What is it that you like about that body? Okay, it's the booty. Okay, it's the quads. Except that your process is not going to look the same as theirs. There are people at the gym, I'm not going to lie, I'm friends with 2 of them, and I'm just like, dude, seriously, the fact that you don't even train your ass and you have an ass the size of freaking Nicki Minaj, like, it's just within her genes. She has struggles building other parts of her body. Her butt is just freaking extra large.
Is she also 4'9"? Because that's usually the case.
She's my height, but the thing is, she has a waist this small, and her butt is just, it stores most of her fat. So we need to get realistic with where our bodies are and how we can change them with what we have, because we cannot change the cards we are dealt with. We can only play them the best we've got. Why do I always get it better than I rambled through the middle of it itself? That's your dessert. The main meal was boring. I'm sorry.
Sure, you feel better, right? I'll finish off because I desperately need to go. Right, there's this thing where people will look at a really in shape person or whatever, and a really common phrase to hear in the fitness space is, "You just don't want it enough." And I honestly think that phrase should be looked at completely different to how it is. When someone says you don't want it enough, that's usually taken on as like this knock to your dedication or something like that. Whereas this is the way I would prefer people to think of it, okay? I've been really lean. I've had a 6-pack. I know lots of people who have had 6-packs. And I will tell you straight, without any hesitation, that it's fucking miserable. Okay? If you want to have a 6-pack and if you want to be really, really lean, what that will require in every circumstance is either drugs, incredible genetics, those two are kind of interchangeable, or a massive sacrifice. If you want to have a 6-pack, if you want to have that really lean body, the kind of one that you will see on Instagram, that is going to necessitate training 4 or 5 times a week. It's going to necessitate large amounts of cardio. It will necessitate radical amounts of dietary restriction. So you'll be prepping all of your meals. You will be the dickhead that is taking Tupperware with them all the time. You will be the person that's asking in a restaurant if you can have a salad instead of chips. You will be the person saying no to drink and alcohol, and you will have to do that every time. Your friends are having a takeaway, you're bringing Tupperware with you. That is what is going to be necessitated if you want to be that lean. And the truth of the matter is that it's shit. It is not worth it. And if someone tells you, "Oh, you could have a 6-pack, you just don't want it enough," you should wear that as a part, as a badge of pride. Because the reason you don't want it enough is because you probably have other priorities. I am not as lean as I could be because I enjoy eating tasty food with my wife. I enjoy going on holiday and not training while I'm there. I train really hard, but I'm not going to train 5-6 times a week. I have other hobbies. I have other things to do. And I honestly recommend that what most people need to do when it comes to nutrition and exercise is not to think of this really lean goal weight and work as hard as they possibly can to get there. What they need to do instead is work out an amount of exercise, an amount of nutritional management that's going to fit in with their life, and then just do that. And the results will be that you'll get pretty lean, you'll get pretty muscular, you'll get way healthier, your heart health will be better, your cardiovascular health will be better, and then you can spend all of that additional cognitive energy on other shit that's actually enjoyable. Because if you can do it that way, exercise becomes way easier to maintain and you'll be happy with the results rather than just getting there and thinking, what now? I've got to maintain this for the rest of my life. When you can't.
I love that.
And that's it. That's my piece.
I guess we really ended with a chocolate brownie. Sorry, the main wasn't as good as our dessert, but I hope you enjoyed that podcast. If there's anything else that you want to hear about, let me know. I have an amazing 2 podcasts coming up. One is on everything to do with the hard truths around fat loss and things that other trainers don't tell you and other coaches won't tell you. And the other one is on self-sabotage and mindset things that keep you stuck. So stay tuned in, let us know. And if there's anything else you want Tom and I to ramble on about, let me know, and you will hear us on the next Anti-Wellness Wank3ry episode. Bye-bye.